found out that my wife was cheating when a neighbor brought me the keys to our house. The keys she had forgotten in his apartment. "I think these are yours," he said, looking at me with a wry smile. She stopped by for coffee, but she must have gotten carried away. The words cut my ears. There was something in his voice that made my hands clench into fists. But I took the keys and thanked him as if everything was normal, as if my world hadn't just cracked in half. Once inside the house, I closed the door, sank into a chair, and put my keys on the table in front of me. They lay there, silent and cold, like evidence of a crime. My mind refused to accept it, but my intuition was already screaming. Something is wrong. I decided not to jump to conclusions. People make mistakes. Could have been an accident. But when Marie came home that night and smiled lightly at me, my eyes stopped on her hand. She was holding a bag, but not the right keys. "Is everything okay?" she asked, noticing my look. "Yes," I answered evenly. "It's just been a long day." She nodded and went into the bedroom, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume that I did not recognize. That was the moment I realized I could no longer trust her. Observations. For the next few days, I picked up the pieces. I became quieter, calmer, as if nothing was happening. Marie continued her life, but now I noticed every detail. Her new weekend plans. Her phone, which she never let out of her hands. Her calls with friends that ended at 10 o'clock in the evening. I learned to wait, and the wait paid off. One morning, when she said she was going to a meeting with her colleagues, I followed her. Nothing complicated. An old baseball cap, glasses, and enough distance. She wasn't going to a cafe or office. She was going to the other side of town, to an area that she and I had always avoided because of its bad reputation. She parked in front of a small house and disappeared behind the door. A few minutes later, I saw a man walk through the same door, a man I had never seen before. Getting to know him, the next time I decided to go further. I found a house online. For rent, no names, just a contact number that I added to my list. Then I did something even bolder. I called the house. The man on the other end of the line answered briefly. "Yes?" I pulled myself together. "I'm looking for Marie. Did she leave anything here?" "I'm her husband." Silence. Deaf and heavy. "I'm sorry, who?" And then he hung up the phone. That call changed everything. Now I knew the game was just beginning. I had no idea how dark and twisted the road would be. But I was ready to go all the way. I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. The voice on the other end of the line was neither surprised nor calm. It was wary. It was the tone of a person hiding something. The next day I drove up to that house again. This time I didn't wait in the car. I walked to the door, looked around at the empty street and knocked. No one answered. I knocked again. When the door creaked open, a woman in her 40s stood in front of me. She looked at me with cold, distant eyes. "Who do you want?" Her voice was dry. "I'm looking for Marie," I answered, trying to keep my temper in check. I was told she might be here. The woman tilted her head, her eyes quickly running over me from head to toe. "Sorry, you have the wrong address." She tried to close the door, but I managed to put my foot between them. "I was not mistaken," I said calmly. "Who lives here? Who was here yesterday?" She looked at me again and whispered sharply, "Get out of here before it's too late." The door slammed in my face. This time the lock clicked. I stood on the doorstep for a few more minutes, realizing that I had no answers, but I had more and more questions. I went back to the car and turned on the navigator. If they don't want to talk, I muttered to myself, then they have something to hide. In the evening, I sat at my laptop trying to find at least some connection between Marie and this house. A search in open databases yielded 0 results. No official documents, bills, or addresses leading back to her. But I knew that the house was rented through an intermediary. I decided to dig deeper and called my old friend Travis, who used to work in the bank security service. He had a knack for finding things that others couldn't. "Travis, I need your help. One address and one name." "What are you looking for?" he asked, not wasting time with unnecessary chatter. I want to find out who rents the house. I replied and dictated the address. And check if there are any other records that don't contradict the official story. It'll be tomorrow, Travis replied. But I'd advise you to stay out of it. I smiled to myself. It's too late. The next day, Travis called earlier than I expected. Listen carefully. His voice was serious. The house is registered to a shell company. The landlord is using fake identities, but I found the transactions. One of the cards is linked to an account used regularly by... He stopped. Who? My fingers tightened on the phone. Marie. Your wife. I felt everything inside me sink. I kind of suspected it, but hearing it out loud was like being punched in the face. My wife paid for this house, and from what I could see, she wasn't using it for work or to meet friends. Travis continued, but there is something else. It looks like someone in this house recently made a large money transfer. And the recipient, speak now. It's a company from New York. The name on the transfer matches the one you mentioned to me once. James. A name I had already come to hate with every fiber of my being. The man she was cheating on me with was now part of something bigger. What kind of company? I finally asked. A financial fund, Travis replied. But it seems like it's just a front. Are you sure you want to go ahead with this? I hung up the phone and sat down in complete silence for a moment. Now I knew one thing. Marie's betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg, and this iceberg stretched much deeper than I could have ever imagined. I sat in the dark, looking at my phone. There was only one name in my head, James. The man I had initially thought was just my wife's lover was now the key to something much bigger. This was no longer a simple betrayal. It was an intertwining of lies, money, and possibly crimes. The next morning, I made a decision. I decided to find James in person. With Travis's help, I got the address of his office in New York City. It was an old building that housed an investment company. I didn't know what I was going to see, but I was drawn to it. I arrived in New York in the late afternoon and parked a few blocks from the office. As I walked up the stairs, I stopped in front of a door with a sign that said, Martin Investments. The door was closed, but I could see through the glass panels that someone was inside. I knocked. A woman in a business suit opened the door. Her eyes swept over me, and a wary expression appeared on her face. How can I help you? She asked. I need James. It's urgent, I replied. Do you have an appointment? Believe me, he will want to see me. She sighed and waved her hand, inviting me inside. I waited in a small meeting room. A few minutes later, the door opened and he walked in. James was exactly how I had imagined him, tall, confident, with a smile I wanted to wipe off with a single punch. You're Marie's husband, he said, sinking into a chair across from me. What are you doing here? I know what you're doing, James, I replied, keeping my temper in check. I know about the accounts. I know about the transfers. The house. His face remained emotionless for a moment, and then he smiled. That smile had nothing to do with kindness. What are you going to do about it? He asked. Are you going to report it to the police? Are you going to tell the world? You don't even realize what you've gotten yourself into. You're using my wife, I said, leaning closer. And it will end. Tonight. James stopped smiling. Marie is not as innocent as you think. She came to me on her own. Do you know why? Because you were nothing to her. His words hurt more than any punch. But I didn't let him see it. I don't care how it started. I'll end it, I said coldly. If you don't leave her alone, everyone will know about your dirty schemes. James stood up, snapping his fingers. You made a big mistake coming here, he said. Some things are better left in the shadows. He left the room, and I was left alone with the feeling that I had pissed off a much bigger snake than I expected. Outside, I took out my phone and called Travis. Find me everything on James and this company. They're hiding something. Are you sure you want to get involved in this anymore? He sounded concerned. I've already gone too far. I threw the phone on the passenger seat and started the car, feeling the rage building inside me. This wasn't just my marriage. This was my truth. And I was going to find it no matter what it took. My plan was simple. collect everything I could find out about James and finally expose them all. This was no longer a matter of my dignity or my broken marriage. It became a personal war that I could not lose. Travis called back the next morning. He sounded worried. "Look, this is bad. Very bad." He took a deep breath. "I found some key transactions. James is connected to another company that masquerades as a law firm. It's a huge money laundering scheme. And Marie?" I asked. "She's not just a victim," Travis said, slowly choosing his words. "It looks like she was working for them. I found payments into her account, regular and quite large." Took my breath away. Confirmed what I didn't want to admit. Marie wasn't just a fraud. She was part of this filth. Did she know how deep it would go? Was she a willing part of this game? "I have one address," Travis continued. "It's some kind of warehouse on the outskirts of town. The last payments to James's account go there." "Thank you, Travis," I said. "I'll take it from here. Don't do anything stupid." His voice was almost a plea. "You don't even know who's behind all this." "But I will find out," I answered and hung up. Warehouse on the outskirts. I arrived at the site when the sun was already setting. The neighborhood was almost deserted. The warehouse looked abandoned, but I noticed several new surveillance cameras installed on the corners of the building. Whatever was going on there, they were guarding it. I went to the side entrance and checked the door. It was locked. Pulling out a flashlight, I walked around the building and found another entrance, an old door that was barely hanging on its hinges. I pushed it with my shoulder and it gave way with a creak. It was dark and quiet inside. The smell of gasoline and dampness hung in the air. I shone my flashlight and saw several boxes. They were labeled, but no logos or company names. I opened one of them. Inside were documents, contracts, and black ledgers. Every second sheet had James' name on it. And then I saw her name, Marie. Her signature was on several contracts. My head was spinning. It was my final confirmation. She was in on it from the beginning. And while I was lost in my suspicions, she was playing the role of the perfect wife. "You know, I thought you were smarter," a voice said behind me. I turned around and saw him. James was standing by the door, calm as ever. Next to him were two other men. They looked like they were used to solving problems with their fists. "You thought you could expose this and walk away?" James continued, coming closer. "You have no idea what you're playing with." "And Marie," I whispered, clenching my fists. "Was she just a tool too?" James laughed. "Oh no. She was one of the best. Your wife is a very talented actress. It's a pity you didn't realize it earlier." His words hit me harder than I expected. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. "It ends today," I said, grabbing the documents from the table. James stepped forward and waved to his men. "You're not going anywhere." Struggle. They rushed at me at the same time. I managed to dodge the first blow and pushed one of the men aside. The documents scattered on the floor. The second blow hit me in the shoulder, but my adrenaline kept me going. I grabbed a metal pipe that was lying against the wall and hit one of them on the knee. He fell down screaming. James stood back, watching with a smile. "You won't escape," he said. I picked up the stack of documents from the floor and ran for the exit. Footsteps followed me, but I was faster. I jumped outside and ran to the car. The engine started the first time and I stepped on the gas. In the rearview mirror, I could see James standing in the doorway of the warehouse, looking after me. End of the game. I took the documents to Travis and Alec, who worked in the press. A few days later, all the materials were published. The headlines screamed about financial fraud, money laundering, and the vast network of fraud they had uncovered. Among the names that came up in the articles was Marie's. My wife had nowhere else to go. The last time I saw her was in the courtroom. She tried to meet my eyes, but I no longer saw her as the woman I once loved. It was not a victory. It was an ending. Sometimes the truth does not bring relief, but it is always liberating. My life changed forever, and although I lost everything, I finally found what I was looking for: the truth. I did not feel victorious, neither when the headlines appeared in the news, nor when the documents became public, and the names of those who had been hiding in the shadows for years were exposed. Everyone but me considered it a triumph. For me, it was just the end of something that shouldn't have started. That morning I woke up in a new place. A small apartment on the outskirts of the city, with bare walls and an old couch, was all I had left. My documents and laptop were on the table next to a packet of coffee. I got up, poured myself a drink, and sat down on a chair by the window. There, behind the thin curtains, the world moved on as if nothing had happened. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Travis. The court announced the verdict. James got 10 years. Marie didn't escape either, 5 years probation and a huge fine. You did it. I looked at the screen and then put the phone aside. You did it. Words that meant nothing to me. I knew I had won the battle, but at what cost? I lost my wife, my trust, my old life. People looked at me not as a hero, but as a madman who dug too deep. I decided to take a walk. The air was damp and heavy with the approaching rain. I walked along the empty streets, trying to find some sense of connection with the world. I needed to hear her. Again. One last time. I took out my phone and dialed Marie's number. The connection was long. And then I heard her voice, quiet and exhausted. "Why did you call?" she asked. "I wanted to understand," I said slowly. "From the very beginning. Was it all a game for you?" "At first, no." Her voice trembled. "At first, I really loved you. But then things changed. They promised more. Money, opportunities, a way out of a life I thought was killing me. And me?" My voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "What was I to you? You were the one I failed. You won, but we both lost." She hung up first. I held the phone to my ear for a few more seconds, listening to the silence. Marie was right. I won, but I lost more than I could have imagined. A few weeks later, I received an envelope. It contained an unsigned letter and a photo. The photo was of James, smiling and free, coming out of a building. The date on the photo was yesterday. The letter contained only one sentence. "Some people never stay in a cage for too long." I looked at the photo for a long time before putting it back on the table. James had escaped part of his punishment. Whether it was for money or at the expense of other people, I didn't know. But it meant one thing: the game was not over. Perhaps the truth never has an end. It just changes shape. I got up, took my jacket and went out into the night. The rain had already begun to fall, erasing the traces of the past. But I would not stop anymore. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the real truth is always hidden in the shadows. And this time I will find it finally. I walked through the rain, listening to the drops hitting the asphalt. The street lamps barely illuminated the dark corners, but I was already used to the shadow. It had become my constant companion. I knew James was free, which meant the story was not over. I went back to my apartment and opened my laptop. Again. This time I decided to dig even deeper. If James was able to get away with some of his punishment, it meant that he still had connections. Maybe someone helped him. While reviewing the financial records I had saved earlier, I came across a new trail, a company called Averton Limited. The most recent transactions pointed to it. Its name had never come up in the first investigation, and that made it even more suspicious. I entered the company's name into a search engine, but found only vague information. A fictitious office, no contacts, and the owners were registered somewhere in the Cayman Islands. A classic front for something much bigger. But there was one clue. Among the old accounts I saw a name. Came up along with transfers to Marie. Eric Hunter. Who is he? The next day I called Travis. He sounded tired, but he answered almost immediately. "What is it now, buddy? You said it was over." "Not really," I replied. "I need to find out about Eric Hunter. Find out everything you can." Travis sighed. "You give me a name and nothing else? You know how it works." "Start with the finances," I said. "If he's somehow connected to James or Marie, I want to know." A few hours later, Travis called back. His voice sounded wary. "Listen carefully. Eric Hunter is not just a name. He is the man behind several shell companies. He owns Averton Limited, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. He seems to have been in charge of the schemes that James was running. And the best part is he's in town. In our city. I asked again, clutching the phone. Yeah. He arrived there 3 days ago. Looks like he's planning something. Couldn't be a coincidence. James is free, and now a new player is back in town. Do you have his address? I asked. I didn't tell you that, Travis replied. But yes, I found the hotel where he was staying. I wrote down the address and hung up. The hotel was expensive and impeccably clean. I walked through the lobby trying to look inconspicuous. People in suits were talking on their phones. Tourists were carrying suitcases. I approached the reception desk. I'm sorry. I have an appointment with Mr. Hunter, but I don't remember the room number, I said calmly. The woman behind the counter looked up and smiled politely. One moment, please. She typed something on the computer and nodded. Mr. Hunter asked not to be disturbed. It's urgent, I replied, feigning irritation. I can come up myself. Just give me the number. She hesitated for a few seconds but finally agreed. 502. 5th floor. Thank you. I started toward the elevator. My heart beating so hard it was echoing in my ears. Could have been a trap, but I couldn't stop. I went up to the 5th floor and approached the door with the number 502. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Still silence. I looked around the corridor. It was empty. I squeezed the door handle and pushed gently. The door was unlocked. Upon entering, I smelled an expensive perfume. The room was almost empty, but there was an open laptop and several documents on the table. I came closer and saw a familiar name on the top sheet. Marie. And another name was written next to it. Mine. The blood froze in my veins. I was part of the game before I even realized it. Eric Hunter knew about me. Maybe he had been watching me all along. I wouldn't touch that if I were you, a voice said behind me. I turned around. In the doorway stood a man in an expensive suit, with bright blue eyes and a cold smile. Eric Hunter, I whispered. It's very nice to meet you in person, he replied, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. You've gone too far, but I have to admit that I like your persistence. What do you want? I asked. Eric laughed. The question is not what I want. The question is what you are going to do next. You won't be able to stop it, but if you play it right, you might still be able to save your life. Is this a threat? That's a fact, he replied and took an envelope out of his pocket. You'll read this when you leave. This is your last chance. I took the envelope without taking my eyes off it. I'll see you again, Eric said, opening the door and gesturing for me to come out. I left the room with only one thought in my head. It's not over yet. I left the hotel, clutching the envelope until my knuckles turned white. The rain began to fall again, cold drops washing away the remnants of my doubt. I was in a game I couldn't get out of. Eric Hunter had given me a last chance, but I knew it was a trap. They leave no witnesses. In the car, I put the envelope on the passenger seat and just stared at it for a few minutes. Anxiety was pulsating in my head, but I couldn't wait. I tore the edge of the envelope and took out a thin sheet. We have been watching you from the very beginning. Don't try to change the game, you have no chance of winning. Leave the city and forget about all this. That's your only choice. There was no signature at the bottom, just 2 words, trust the shadow. It became difficult for me to breathe. They knew my every move. I thought I was playing ahead, but now I realized that I was always a few steps behind, and they let me feel it. I went to Travis. He was the only person I could still trust. The road seemed endless, and every car in the rearview mirror made me tense. Travis opened the door, looking like he hadn't slept in days. You look terrible, he said, inviting me inside. It doesn't matter, I replied, throwing the envelope on the table. They know everything about me. They gave me a last chance. Travis took the letter, quickly skimmed it, and silently threw it on the table. This is a warning, and it is real. What do you suggest? Run away? Surrender? My voice was full of anger. I've already lost everything. I have nowhere to go. Travis sat down on a chair, rubbing his face with his hands. Then there is only one thing left. Go all in. What do you mean? Exposing them all at the same time. Do you have any documents? Do you have records? We need to hit them so hard that they don't have time to recover. Bring everything to light. I was silent. His words seemed crazy, but it was my only way out. Playing in the dark no longer worked. The next day, Travis and I gathered all the materials. Financial documents, transfer records, proof of Eric Hunter's and James' involvement. I knew it was a risk, but there was no other choice. I contacted my old friend Alec, a journalist who had once helped me expose the first threads of this scheme. Are you sure you want to do this? Alec asked when I handed him all the files. This is not just an article. This is a war. I'm ready, I replied. The story appeared in the press the next morning. Headlines screamed of a large-scale financial conspiracy, criminal schemes, and high-level corruption. The names of Eric Hunter, James, and other participants were on the front pages of the news. All the evidence we had gathered was posted online. I knew it was only the beginning. The same day my phone rang. The number was hidden. You've made your choice, Eric's familiar voice said. Calm, cold. Now wait for us. I'm not afraid of you anymore, I replied. He laughed. You don't even realize you've started yet. The connection was cut off. I stood by the window and watched the city go about its business. Somewhere in the shadows, they were already making new plans. But this time they knew I wouldn't stop. I was ready, because when the shadows get too close, the only way to survive is to become light. It was not over yet, but now I knew that the truth mattered, and I was ready to fight until my last breath. The following days passed in a blur. I didn't leave my apartment, and my phone was silent. After Eric's call, I knew they wouldn't wait long, but so far nothing had happened. I was sitting on the floor, with a laptop and scattered documents in front of me. I was rereading the materials, as if trying to find something new that could save me. But all the keys had already been used. There was a knock on the door. 3 clear, confident strokes. My brain screamed, "Don't open it." But my intuition told me otherwise. I took a heavy flashlight from my desk, turned off the light, and slowly walked to the door. Who is it? It's Alec. Open up. The journalist's voice sounded muffled. I unlocked the lock and Alec came inside. He was wet from the rain and looked worried. What happened? I asked, looking at him. They're moving fast. Have you seen the news? Alec threw a newspaper on the table, with my own photo staring back at me. Asterisk anonymous source exposed. Is the main witness part of the scheme? Asterisk. My heart clenched. What is it? I whispered. They set you up? Alec gestured around my apartment. Eric and his people leaked fake documents that made your role look completely different. Now you're not a hero. You're an accomplice. I broke out in a cold sweat. I sat down on a chair, feeling the ground slipping away from under my feet. But that's a lie, I said in a low voice. It doesn't matter, Alec replied. They control the narrative. The police will be here soon. I stood up. What should I do? Alec looked at me seriously. Run away. Escaping. I packed my things in 10 minutes. A laptop, a hard drive with copies of all the materials, and some cash left over from old stocks. Alec went first to check for surveillance. Go out the back door, he said into the phone as he signaled. Quickly, I went out into the street, where the darkness merged with the rain. No one was paying attention to the man in the hooded jacket who was hurrying toward the abandoned alleys. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it in my ears. From a distance, I saw the headlights of a car. A black sedan was standing on the corner. I slowed down, trying to figure out if they were following me. The car door opened. Sit down. Travis' voice made me breathe a sigh of relief. I jumped into the car and he stepped on the gas. Plan B. We drove in silence for several hours. The road led out of town, where there were no cameras, no lights, no people. Travis stopped at an old warehouse. What is it? I asked. A place where you can hide for a while. I'm still digging. But you need to disappear. What are you digging for? We've already exposed everything. Travis looked away. Not all of it. I think Eric Hunter is only part of the chain. There is someone higher up. And they're not gonna let you just walk away. His words made me shudder. Where to next? I asked. I will find you. In the meantime, just live. Stay away from the news. Travis handed me a new phone. No one can know where you are. He drove away, leaving me alone in the dark. Expectations. The following days turned into an endless routine. I didn't leave the warehouse, ate canned food and listened to the silence every night, trying to hear footsteps or the sound of cars. I was a ghost. But one night I woke up to a new phone ringing. The number was hidden. Hi! Marie's voice came through. My heart sank. What do you want? I whispered. You think this was all an accident? Her voice was calm, but there was something eerie in it. You were part of the plan from the beginning. What? My voice trembled. Haven't you ever wondered why you've survived so far? Why they let you expose so much? She paused. Because they want you to. They want you to find someone for them. Who? The one who controls all of this. The shadow that stands over Hunter. I sat in the dark, not believing my own ears. And why me? Because now you have no choice. The connection was cut off. I put the phone down and ran my hands over my face. Everything I knew was crumbling with each passing day. They didn't just want to get rid of me, they were using me. And now I had a choice. Either to run away or to find out who was at the top of this game. I got up and took my laptop. This time I will not stop. Silence in the darkness became my new companion. I was sitting in a warehouse where every sound was like thunder in my head. Marie's words kept echoing. They want you to find him. The shadow over Hunter. I had been a cog in their machine, but now I was going to be the one to break it. It's time for the final move. Preparation. I pulled out my laptop and went through all the files I'd been saving for years. Financial ties, shell companies, names, every thread was stretching to a bigger web. Among them, one name kept popping up that I hadn't noticed before. William Cord. I found out that he was one of the founders of the group behind Hunter and the others. A man who always hid in the shadows, leaving his cronies to do all the dirty work. But Cord was careful. No photos, no trace of him in the media. Only old documents that pointed to him as someone big working outside the system. Meeting with Alec. I contacted Alec and we agreed to meet in an empty cafe on the outskirts of the city. This is dangerous, he said when I showed him the files. Cord is not just a businessman. He's a man who can wipe you off the face of the earth with one phone call. Let him try, I replied, lighting a cigarette. This time I won't run away. Alec sighed heavily. What do you want to do? To make him come out of the shadows. If he thinks he's untouchable, I'll prove him wrong. Shadow trap **********. I created a fake information leak. Some files were uploaded to the network, in which William Cord's name appeared next to major financial schemes. I knew it would attract attention. A day later, my phone rang. You really don't know how to listen. Cord's voice came through. It was deep, clear, and eerily calm. You really can't hide, I replied. Now everyone knows your name. You don't realize what you've done. His voice remained steady. Do you think the truth will set you free? It won't. It will only destroy you. We'll see, I said and hung up. Final. The next morning I turned on the TV. The news began to explode one after another. William Cord, exposing a large-scale financial conspiracy, new documents in the case against shadowy structures. I knew that Cord would not disappear just like that, but his time was up. I sat in my apartment and waited. I waited for the call, for the knock on the door, for the end. And it came. Someone knocked. I got up and walked to the door. No thoughts, no fear. I opened it. There was no one there. Only a small envelope was lying on the floor. Picked it up and opened it. On the sheet was written, ****, this is not the end. Shadows always return. I smiled. I was no longer afraid of their threats. I knew that the truth always leaves a mark that cannot be erased. This time they lost. I walked around the apartment, gathered my things and walked out the door. My life had been burned to the ground, but now I was